Hello and welcome to another interesting episode of Valiant Voices, showing on your digital first Pan-African news network, that is TUS Television. And as always, it's a time where we bring you educative, informative, and of course, entertaining content, revolving around the lives of youth and how they have made impact in society. On today's edition of the program, we talk about politics in Nigeria, youth's nonchalance. And with me in the studio this day to talk about this issue is the Executive Director of ACE Center in the person of Mr. Obinna Osisiogu. You're welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Merciful.
Thank you so much. All right, let's go straight to the point. What do you think is the issue of all of this? We've been talking about, youth involvement in politics, they're laid back and everything. What is the root cause? What is the issue?
Well, the issue, they are twofold, right? One is a general sense of apathy.
Okay.
Two is ineffective engagement. It's one thing to criticize the government on social media. One of the favorite pastimes of Nigerians, whenever they gather both in the country, outside the country, the conversation is just sort of, segue into the issues of bad governance that we face in the country, but the thing is, it's one thing to have those conversations. It's also another thing to effectively channel our concerns and our demands for accountability to the leadership through the appropriate channels and make sure that they actually yield results. Mm-hmm. And for that to happen, which is pretty much effective citizen engagement, for that to happen, the citizens, the young people need to have a certain skill set. They need to know what the political structure is, the structure of governance is, the actual responsibilities of each section, segment, person, in governance, of governance, and how to channel their complaints and their concerns appropriately, And these are some of the issues. Nigerians need to know how to reach out to their legislators. They need to know who their legislators are in the first place. They need to know where their constituency offices are, because every legislator has a constituency office. I know we work closely with the House of Representatives, and we understand now that as a matter of rule, of policy, the Speaker has mandated every member of the House to create a constituency office. So we are aware that majority of the legislators have constituency offices. So young people need to know where these places are, how to go there, write to the legislators, call the legislators. If you need to protest, you go to the constituency office, say you protest. These are things that keep the elected officials a bit uncomfortable and on their toes for them to deliver their services appropriately. And so I think that's the concern. One is general apathy. Two is lack of the requisite skill sets, for effective engagement. And these are the two things that drive ACE Center's mission. We are trying to, ACE Center, what we try to do is we try to simplify civic engagement using creative technology and using, offline approaches, creative offline approaches to simplify that process. In doing this, we try to encourage participatory governance. We try to, on the one hand, educate and equip government officials and public servants, with the necessary requisite skill set that they need to make impactful policies. And then on the other hand, we try to equip and empower Nigerian citizens with the skill sets, the knowledge base that they need to effectively engage with government.
And how has this been so far?
It's been an interesting journey. Within the just about a year or more of operations, we've been able to accomplish quite a lot. We have two flagship programs. One is the 9th House Sectoral Roundtable Sessions, and the other is the We Vote initiative. So for the 9th House Sectoral Roundtable Sessions, it's a big of a tongue twister, but it's also known as 9th House SRS. What we have done is that we've partnered with the House of Representatives to drive sectoral engagements. The idea for that is to foster citizen engagement post-elections. At We Vote, at A Center, we're looking at engagement in two phases. One is engagement at the point of election, and then the second one is engagement post-election. Because it's one thing you have to, after electing your leaders, you also have to engage them, make sure that their governance, their policy making is a participatory one. You're actively involved, and that's why it's a democracy. You're actively involved in their decision-making processes because they represent you. And so with the Ninth House SRS, what we do is we facilitate roundtable sessions and policy conversations between the House of Representatives and various socioeconomic sectors of the nation. Last year, just about November rather, we organized the first sectoral roundtable session, which was between the House of Reps and the health sector. We had key stakeholders from the health sector participate. We had the Minister of State for Health. We had the NCDC DG, being that we were in the thick of coronavirus pandemic at the time. We had the President of the Nigerian Medical Association, Professor Innocent Oja. We had a lot of people also from the development sector. We had the country representative of WHO participate. We had the Director of Health for UNICEF participate. We had a number of top representatives. We had a senior director from World Bank. We had a number of representatives from various key development partners. And then we had representatives from NAD, who is currently striking. We had representatives from MCDN. We had representatives from top-tier hospitals. And we had representatives from the HMOs. A couple of the HMOs were participating. We had someone also from KPMG and all of that. So we had a lot of stakeholders come and discuss key policies in the health sector. And it was a very beautiful engagement. The outcome of it was what we call the Green Book, which documents, is currently on our website. It documents all the conversations that we had and the policy recommendations that were made. And that Green Book on health was presented to the Speaker of the House earlier this year. As a result of that engagement, the Speaker promised to put health on the front burner of, the top priority, as top priority of the House of Representatives. And it's also something to be proud of, that the conversations that we had in that session, because that session had in participation the chairman of the Health Services Committee and the chairman of the House Committee on Health Institutions. And so an outcome of that conversation, engagements, the outcome of those engagements influenced the review of the National Health Act Amendment Bill. The public hearing was recently concluded, and those recommendations came in, factored in when they were doing that, and we are happy with the results so far.
All right, let's talk about youth involvement in politics in terms of coming out to contest. Not quite recently, but it has been like an advocacy from different people. Like, we should, give people that ground, young people, to come out and contest. But it has not always been, we've been, shouting, come out and contest. Young people can come out and contest. But still, talking about the last elections, we saw the turnout of, young people. Yeah, we had the likes of some people from small parties. We have major parties, which is PDP and APC, but still, there is no spotlight that has been beamed on that young people thingy. Do you think is something that we can, influence?
Yes, perfectly. It's perfectly doable. I hate to be overly confident, but I'd like to say that at A Center, we've actually mapped out a strategy to solve that problem. You see, the thing with participation of young people in politics is twofold. One is the fact that the barriers to contesting elections in Nigeria are still very high. They need to be brought down.
When you say barriers, what do you mean?
So, for instance, the cost of nomination forms. Okay. Let's start from the basics, right? The cost of nomination forms. And when we're discussing cost of nomination forms for parties, right, we are discussing the commercialization of elections in Nigeria. I don't want to go into the concept of, or the issue of the challenge of the fact that as candidates you have to dole out monies here and there. That's the expectations of the electorate before you can even acquire some form of legitimacy substantial enough for you to be a serious contender. I mean, that's a different issue altogether, which we're also addressing. But then let's look at the cost of nomination forms. Recently PDP, made a statement. Apparently, they had made over 100 million in sale of forms. And it's a very ridiculous practice.
Very ridiculous.
I looked around the world and to see where else in the world that political parties sell nomination forms. And I don't know where we got that practice from. Honestly, it's very, very
Elections
shocking.
as fundraising.
As fundraising. And so, we can, of course, say, scrap that practice altogether, but we understand the Nigerian context. So one of the things that we are doing and we are supporting is the push for electoral reforms. And one of the reforms demands that we're making, citizens are making, is to reduce the cost of, purchasing nomination forms. That's once that goes down, then a very major barrier for young people participating or contesting elections is reduced. The other aspect of youth participation in politics is the general sense of voter apathy. And I'll put this in context for you. In 2003, the voter turnout was 69%. 4 years later, 2007, the voter turnout was 57%. 4 years later, 2011, the voter turnout was 54%. 2015, 44%. 2019, 34%. So it's been on a steady decline. And if the numbers are anything to go by, for instance, at the recently conducted by-elections at Aba, the voter turnout was about 5%. Aba North and Aba South federal constituencies, right? Their member representing them passed on, God rest his soul. They conducted a by-election. Two local governments of 400 residents, only about 5% came out to vote. And what happens is that this 5% elects the leader. They've elected somebody now. The person has joined the House of Representatives. He's going to be there for 2 years. And then what's going to happen is that for the next 2 years, the remainder of the 400,000 people in that constituency are going to be complaining about, whatever issues they have with his leadership. But then they did not participate in that process. And so what we've realized is that young people have erroneously convinced themselves that their votes don't count, that the elections are going to be rigged. And so there's no need for them to participate in the process. And by doing so, they've actively disenfranchised themselves. And one of the challenges that we face when we try to advocate and talk to people based on our We Vote initiative and try to get young people to vote is, you see them, even take pride in their cynicism and say things like, after all, they're going to rig the election, last, that what we need is constitutional reform. It's not voting. Voting is not going to solve the problem. And I tell them, you see, the cynicism that you feel, it might feel like an original idea, but it's not really an original idea. You've been programmed to think that way because it benefits the political elites. They want you to stay away from the elections. And you're making things easier for them by embracing that. Let's look at it this way. Like I said, the last general elections, population of 200 million Nigerians, only 28 million people voted. 28 million is 14% of the entire population. Whatever issues you have with the current administration, you're dealing with the decision of 14% of Nigerians. And all you're doing is complaining. And the truth of the matter is that let's assume that they rig elections. It's factually easier to rig 28 million votes than it's going to be to rig 100 million votes. So by staying away from elections, you're making the job easier for the people who want to rig.
All right, we'll just go on a short break now, and when we return, we'll continue with the conversation. Do stay. You're welcome back to Valiant Voices, showing on your digital first Pan-African news network, TOS Television. And as always, you can always be a part of it, by following us across all our social media handles at TOS TV Network on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, stream our content live on our website, www.tostvnetwork.com. And don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube. We're still talking to Obinna Osissiogo. Thank you again once more.
Thank you.
So before we went on the break, you said so much about the knowledge-based factor.
Yes.
Youth not knowing what to do, this apathy, whatever is going to happen, let it happen. Don't you think the issue of insecurity is one of the challenges that we're facing now as a country? Because we have to put in context the 2023 general elections and what will happen. If we're having 5%, I mean, you spoke about 5% coming out to vote in Aba. I think personally, someone will say, oh, people are not really safe. Talking about the news we hear every day. How do we manage to tackle all of this to ensure that there's a large turnout of voters, a large turnout of people coming out to participate in the 2023 general elections?
Okay, so I'll start by saying this. You see, the problem the problem with not voting is that you relinquish ownership of your country to the political elites who you complain about for the next 4 years. That's one thing that we need to understand. Two, we also need to understand that the people, the oppressors, the people who have kept this country where it is, where we have an inflation rate of 18 point something percent, 7%, we have a food inflation rate of 22.9%. People who have kept this country in this state, they are resilient people.
What do you mean by that?
By resilient people, I mean they are tireless in their bid to keep Nigeria in the position it is because it benefits them. The way the country is right now works in their interest. And if you're trying to get out from under a resilient oppressor, then you need to be resilient yourself. You need to match their energy with the same energy, and even more, go the extra mile, because that's the only way you can outdo them and take back your country. And when we understand these things, then it sort of primes our mind for the job ahead, the risk ahead, and then we get ready to take on it because we understand what the reward is going to be. Now, to answer the question of insecurity, because we get asked this question a lot when we try to tell people about the need to vote. You see, like I said, the apathy that you feel is programmed, is designed, is by intention. It's designed to make you feel that way and stay away from the election so that only that 14% of Nigerians will continue to participate.
So don't you think one of the reasons why people do not come out in their numbers to vote is a lot of, the issue of insecurity that we're facing? It has always been on the front burners for like in a few months or more, talking about what has been happening in the north that has grown into the south and, even the west. Don't you think that is an issue, a challenge that will affect the 2023 general elections?
You raise a very important question. And to address that, one thing is important to note. Nigerians, by the mere act of staying away from elections, you're relinquishing control, your ownership of government, and you're relinquishing it to the oppressors. That's one. Two is this: when we need to understand that these political elites, people who we can refer to as oppressors, they are resilient people. And by resilient people, what we mean is that they are going above and beyond to subdue Nigeria, to keep Nigeria at the situation where it is, where we have inflation rates at 18.7%, we have food inflation rates at 22.9%, because the current system benefits them. So if you are going to get out from under these oppressors, then you need to be as resilient as they are, or even more resilient. You need to match them with the same energy or go the extra mile, and that's the only way you can get out from under them. So that means when you have this mindset as Nigerians, then it means that you get a good sense of the task ahead, the challenge, what it takes, what's going to demand from you to take on that task. And you prime yourself for the risks, and then you move in. And that's the only way you can get out from an oppressor. You don't get out from an oppressor by being afraid. That's one. Two is to address the question of insecurity. It's a very, very key issue. When we speak to people about voting under our We Vote initiative, it's one of the issues that they raise. So for us, we understand something. The voting, as we vote, we've categorized the voting population into two categories. One are voters with agency. The second category is voters without agency. And what we mean by agency is when you look at Maslow's scale of needs, at the bottom rung of it, you have, by Maslow's scale of needs, we're talking about it's a theory on behavior and motivation. What things motivate people's behavior? Why do people do what they do, say what they say, act the way they are? Right? It's according to their needs, their priorities. So if you're on the bottom rung of it, you're looking for your basic needs, which is food, shelter, clothing, and all of that. And if you go a bit up, the chain or the pyramid, you're talking about psychological needs, needs for
Love and
relationships,
care.
friendship, love and care. You understand this and great. Then you go to the top, you're talking about self-esteem, self-actualization, it's more existential and all of that. Now, the 14% of Nigerians who routinely vote, majority of them are functioning and operating at the bottom rung of that scale of needs. This includes the thugs, the people who perpetrate these acts of violence. It's food, it's shelter, it's money, day-to-day survival. That's why they're operating at that level, and that's why they are willing to come out and operate as thugs. So when you understand that, if you deconstruct the problem of political thuggery, the issue is poverty. And if you can solve the question of poverty for these thugs, then you can start to proffer a solution that works. It might sound far-fetched, but then it's doable, and it's all just a question of how badly as citizens do you want to take back your country. If you want it badly, then you can organize, do what needs to be done, address that issue of poverty, which is an outcome of the deconstructing of political thuggery. Address it, and then you find out that you chip away at that issue of political thuggery. That's one. Two is, I tell people, again, like I said, the political class is intentionally, by design, making you stay away from the elections. They use the fear or threat of violence to make you stay away from the elections, because they want to be able to work and operate with that 14% of Nigerians who they can manipulate. While you, who have agency as a voter, who is not motivated by 1,000 naira that you get, 5,000 naira that you get, you stay away. You disenfranchise yourself. When people talk about violence, the impression that we get, especially from our reaching out to voters, is who avoid polls. Is that, once you go out to contest the election, you might get shot and then you die. But then, statistically, as a matter of fact, the chances that you will fall victim to electoral violence are not as high as a lot of them think. I mean, they are there, but they're not as high as a lot of them think. So the question again is, how badly do you want to take back your country? Just to put this in context for you, you understand how when a president, for instance, is elected, or a person is elected into office, after their first 4 years, chances are high that they will continue a second term because of the influence of that power office that they have, right? Or even if they don't continue for a second term, they can influence who their successor is. So just to put things in context for you, so you understand the scope of things, the stake of things, and then understand, and then decide how badly we want to get back our country. We have 2 years till 2023. Whatever we decide in 2023, we will be stuck with that decision and the effects of that decision for not just 4 years after it, for the next 4 years, that's 8 years. That's a total of 10 years from now. So you have to ask yourself as a Nigerian, how old will you be in 2031, in 10 years? How many kids will you have? What kind of life would you want them to live? What kind of Nigeria do you want them to live in? Because that's the next, if we miss it in 2023, that's the next chance really credible shot that we have at changing things. If we miss it in 2023, that's the next one. So when we understand that this is what is at stake, then we can start to weigh our pros and cons, especially as it regards insecurity, and decide whether we want to go in and take back our country.
Talking about the choice of Nigerians to decide who is going to stay and the ripple effect it will have on the long run, let's talk about gender balance. It has been something, we just concluded the International Month of, celebrating women generally. So do you see that issue also on the front burner when coming 2023 elections?
Yeah, there's a need for gender equality in election. We need to see more women come up. In fact, if we go by history, women leaders tend to perform quite even better than men. So we need to see more women leaders come up into position of authority across the country. That's something that we, at my organization, we actively stand for, actively support. And I actually want to use this opportunity to commend initiatives like Agenda 35 by Electa. It's an organization that is raising funds. I think they're raising about a $10 million fund to de-risk elections, contesting for elections for women, for 35 women. And that's something that we totally love, totally support. We need to see more of that. It's very important that we get women into positions of power. And that's also one of the things that we are also hoping to, as an outcome of the electoral reforms. At A Center too, we're also in support of affirmative action when it comes to gender equality. We believe, especially when you have a situation where a certain category of people have been systematically and almost institutionally marginalized, if you want to undo that imbalance, one of the best ways to actually make that happen is to start by affirmative action. Put a minimum number of seats that mandatorily must be reserved for women, either at the political parties or even in positions of governance. And by doing that, you give them a shot. And then we can then talk about either exceeding that mandatory minimum, or not. And we're actually in support of that. We believe that more women should participate in politics. There's also the concern of not just contesting elections, also voting in elections, also having very vital roles in intra-party politics, the campaign and all of that. What my experience has been is that there's a history of tokenism by political parties. They have a woman leader just so that they've sorted out the women. And what the role of this woman leader I see is to dance, to organize women to dance, during political campaigns and political rallies, to organize the cooking of food and preparation of food. This is 21st century, for goodness sake. We can't be doing that. So they don't have any really credible, very important role when it comes to the political process inside the party. So if they don't have a very strong role inside the party, then how are they even going to be able to emerge into positions of leadership? And so these are some of the things that we're also looking into solving, and hopefully we can begin to see more women in positions of authority in Nigeria.
All right, let's talk about 2023 general elections. Because of time, this is the last question I have. Going by all your projects, all the campaigns A Center, have set out to do, what is your expectation? What hopes do you have? What's the outcome for 2023 general elections?
Two things are our major outcomes, our ideal outcomes. One is we have a target of 66% voter turnout. That's the international average voter turnout. The last election was 34% at the general elections. We want to see 66% voter turnout. We're working on that actively. And then two is that we believe, because we're focusing mainly on the voters who have agency. Most of them exist outside that 14% of Nigerians who voted at the last election. And there are almost about 97 million Nigerians who, by 2023, there will be 125 million Nigerians who will be of voting age, that's 18 years and upwards. If we minus the 28 million who voted at the last election, then I'd say that there's about 97 million Nigerians who are eligible to vote and change the outcomes. They exist outside of the political structures of the two, behemoth political parties in Nigeria. They can substantially shape the outcome. So an ideal outcome for us in 2023 would be third forces emerging, not just the two parties that we are used to, at either the presidential level or the various legislative levels and state government levels. So we are working on that. We encourage people to, visit our website, wevote.ng, and sign up to volunteer, make a pledge to vote. And we're working actively to de-risk participating in elections for them, reduce all the barriers to election participation so we can get, more people to vote and change the outcomes of the elections.
Wow, change the outcome of the elections. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Mr. Obin Nausisio. It's been an insightful one, I must say. And thank you so much for joining us, viewers. Don't forget you can be a part of this by following us across all our social media platforms at TOS TV Network, and also watch this program on the website www.tostvnetwork.com. And don't forget to subscribe as well on our YouTube TOS TV Network. Thank you for joining us. Till we come your way again next week, I remain merciful Ajinomo.